The two questions I'm going to talk about this morning, a question about can goats be trained to polywire, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the two primary types of fencing that we use to subdivide our paddocks for rotational grazing. Good morning, my name is Leslie and I farm in western Wisconsin with the farm Silent Rolling Acres. I raise goats on pasture using regenerative and rotational grazing practices, and this morning I am doing my live Q&A. Hey Molly, hey others for joining. This morning I'm a little bit change of pace of location. Usually I am working in my office because I'm hiding out from my kids. I love them, but I don't need to be interrupted in the morning. But we have guests this morning. My parents are visiting, and I also have a farm cat out here. So nobody really knows I stepped outside to do this. So just answering a few questions this morning, and then we'll go from there. But the two questions I'm going to talk about this morning are training goats. I had a question about can goats be trained to polywire, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the two primary types of fencing that we use to subdivide our paddocks for rotational grazing. So when it comes to using portable fencing with goats, I think anything can be possible if you train them right. I won't be the first to say that I use one strand or two strands of polywire. I know that in our area, there is a dairy goat farm that does intensive rotational grazing, and they do use one strand. I know it's possible. There's another farmer, he probably calls himself a rancher, who's in down in Texas, and I know he uses two strands, Again, it goes back to training and making sure that you keep your fence hot, they have enough to eat, and then if you have any troublemakers, they move on to a new responsibility in life or a new home. So in terms of so that's kind of the piece of it can be done. It just depends on making sure you have those elements together. So what we use for our fencing to subdivide paddocks, we use two types of fencing. So inside a perimeter fence, we use a fence called Smart Fence from Gallagher, and what it is, basically it's 4 polywires in one, 4 reels in one system. That comes with fence posts in it, and it reels up, and it works actually really well. I like it for a number of reasons, because it's easy to use, it's easy to put up. I can get my goats to respect it, and then it's easy to put in the back of our gator. In the replay, I'll have some photos, and I can add some videos of what it looks like. So we use that to subdivide our paddocks in our permanent pasture, and our permanent pasture is woven wire, and I won't get into a lot of that, but we use that smart fence in there. So what we'll do is we'll create a paddock, which is basically a small section of the pasture for our goats to live in for a few days before we move on to a new area. And we use that smart fence to do, I'd call it the back and the front of the paddock. And our pastures are kind of long and narrow, so like a rectangle. So we actually divide the the pasture in half with semi-permanent fencing. And so we're using, in that case, I am using 2 strands of polywire. So I guess I can say I do use it. And I have that in with T-posts and step-in posts, and run that along the center of our permanent pasture. And then I build the paddocks by using the smart fence kind of perpendicular to that, and then in order to make it hot, I connect it to our hot wire on top of our perimeter fence. Same thing with the poly wire in the center, and so that's what we use to keep our goats within that paddock. And then when we move, we just set up another fence and keep moving them down the line that way. The other type of portable fencing that we use to build paddocks is the Electronet fence, and that fence we typically get from Premier One out of Iowa. And we use that anywhere outside of our permanent fencing. And so, I see your question, Molly. I'll bring that up in just a minute. And so the net fencing we use, and just jotting down so I don't forget, our net fencing we use anywhere else outside of our perimeter fence, just because it gives me a little extra sense of security in having less permeable, it is permeable, but fencing option for goats. Also, we have our guardian dogs with that as well, and it's and we also have a lot of wildlife, deer, and then predator wildlife in the area, so it's one more layer. It's not foolproof or predator proof totally, but it is a deterrent along with the dogs. The net fencing with like, we have a lot of deer in our woods too, so the deer, I find, like, even if they jump over the net fencing, while it can fall down, it seems to stay up, or kind of stay up if it does get hit by the deer. So that's the type of fencing we use out there. It works great. The only challenge with it is that it can be challenging to put up and take down. You have to have some patience and make sure you do it right every time. So that takes a little bit more time commitment to use, but it is a great option. And it also is a great option to build paddocks in an existing pasture if you don't maybe have the type of perimeter fencing that you really would like, or you're working with a multi-species environment like Molly, you talked about. I'm assuming you've got horses. I know you had a lot of horses growing up. Maybe you don't have the perimeter fencing that you have set up that you'd like for goats. That is an option to work with. So Molly, you had talked about, if I get a couple of goats, so they need to be stalled each night for safety. I think it depends on your area. So we have a lot of wildlife and predators in our area, but because we have our guardian dogs, and there are guardian, you can use llamas and donkeys too, they actually do a pretty good job of deterring predators from staying away. So it is possible to leave them out. You don't need to bring them in every night, but you kind of need to take a look at, like, what your situation is in your area and your property or your land, in terms of predators and things along those lines. You may find that I know there's some folks who have their animals out in pasture that don't use livestock guardian animals and do just fine. So I think it's definitely doable to have them out, but it kind of depends on your situation. So but that's a good question. I know the first time we had ours out overnight, it was like, oh, are they going to be okay? And they did just fine, but we also have, like I said, guardian animals in our process as well too. So, but kind of last note on using portable fencing, I would say is, and this goes back to whether you're using two-strand, you're using a 4-reel system like the smart fence, or even the net fence, is one, you need to train them, and training is really important. I know some people say they don't train. If you have a lot of goats who are trained, you probably can get away with less training. If you're interested in learning about how to train your goats to electric fencing, and tips for that, I do have a free training guide on my website, Grazing with Leslie. I can also link to it in the comments here later. The second one is keep it hot, especially with net fencing. I know sometimes it can be easy because it looks like it's a physical barrier. It's easy to leave it not electrified. You want to keep it electrified because they can sense when it's on and when it's off, and they will test it. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll test it by jumping out, but they might test it by trying to reach through it to eat other grass, and that can become an issue with tangling. So keep it hot. Keep it on and keep it hot. And then also, if you have troublemakers who constantly are wanting to get out, you need to either retrain them, or it's time to find a new home for them, because they will teach the other goats to do their bad ways. And of course, make sure they have enough to eat as well too. Oh yes, the horses may be enough to kind of keep other predators away. You'll have to kind of see how that works, but you may be just fine with having them in there with your horses as well. So. All right, so that's what I have for this morning. Just a short talk, kind of Q&A on portable electric fencing. I have to say my favorite is the smart fence, just because it's the ease of use for it. But we're kind of getting to the point now where we're at about 8 to 9 years of using our reels, and so we've had to do some maintenance on them. They're not perfect by any means, but they are a lot easier to put up and take down and manage. And time efficient, where the net fencing do a great job, but they're just more work putting up and down, but they do their job, and so it's the most important part is keeping those goats in their paddock where you want them. So, all right, have a good morning. I'm going to take off before I get some visitors, either my dad poking his head through the door or my son asking what I'm doing. So have a good morning. If you have any other questions, I'll continue to do these live Q&As Wednesday mornings. I think I'm going to take next Wednesday off just with the holiday here in the United States. So if you have any other questions, comment below, or when I do the repost, the replay, I will post it on my blog with some other notes related to what I talked about. And if you want to catch my replays in the future, you can always subscribe to our email list. That's through my profile link. So that way you don't always have to be up at 6 a.m., but you can catch it in the future too. So have a good Wednesday. Bye.